Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Father Dustin Fedden, and welcome to today's Catholic Prison Ministry Coalition town hall meeting here. We have a wonderful opportunity to hear from two different individuals, two organizations that are demonstrating, from what I've been able to gather and what we'll all be able to hear in just a minute, quite unique and novel attempts at really dehumanizing the criminal justice system, and of the work that they have done, and perhaps as serving as possible models for those of us that are also engaged in reforming the criminal justice system, and certainly ministry and outreach to those that are incarcerated. But let us begin first, as always, with a prayer. Good and gracious God, we thank you for the gift of life. We thank you that you have shown us the way to uphold the dignity of every human person, especially through the witness of your Son, of his compassion and mercy, of his desire to restore and bring healing to communities that are suffering. We pray that you would give us, each of us, an awareness of your presence this day, that you would increase our desire to continue to build a culture and a community built on mercy and justice. We pray all of this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen. Well, let me provide a few introductions here, and also just a note again that if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them in the Q&A box, and perhaps by the end of today's discussion, we'll be able to answer some of your questions. But first, a few introductions here. Our first speaker, Bruce Noddin, is the founder and director of the Maine Prisoner Re-Entry Network. It is a statewide organization established to measurably reduce Maine's recidivism rate. Bruce is also the co-founder of Rose's Room, a support group for the family and loved ones of those who are and have been incarcerated. Bruce was appointed to the Maine State Workforce Board by Governor Mills in April of 2022, and appointed by Senate President Jackson to the Maine Recovery Council in August of 2022, both recent appointments. Bruce is a, quote, Six Who Care, the Rising Tide and Spirit of Goodwill Award winner, and the recipient of multiple awards for MPRN's community collaboration. And Bruce is also the former executive director of the Rest Center and Columbia Street Project. And among all of this, Bruce, I'm exhausted already knowing how much work you're doing. But on top of all of this, Bruce also leads a weekly jail ministry at the county jail in Auburn, Maine, every Thursday evening. Wow. Appreciate all the work that you're doing, Bruce. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and start with your presentation, Bruce, and then Reverend Dodie, before we jump to you, I'll introduce you at that point, okay? All right. Okay, Bruce.
Thank you, Father Dustin, and thank you all for inviting me to be here today to talk about pretty much my life and what I'm passionate about, which is supporting folks who are getting out of prison and jail. Kara, could you put the slides up? Thank you. So we're going to talk today a little bit about, and I'm not going to bore you with a whole bunch of slides, so bear with me here, about Maine Prisoner Re-Entry Network, and you can see there community connection and collaboration. That's what we're all about. Next slide, please. That's just our logo. Okay, next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where we are today, and then I'm going to talk about how we got there. So we've built statewide and local networks here in the state of Maine. For folks that are joining us from other states, we are a small state as far as population. We're 1.4 million people or so, but we're spread out. We don't have any really large cities by definition of most other parts of the country. But we built this vast network of community partners. And when I say vast, we have literally over 2,000 people who are part of this network, and we have hundreds of organizations that are part of the network, and it is truly statewide. The other thing we do is we do quarterly ready for reentry trainings. So we introduce people to the challenges of supporting folks who are getting out of prison and jail. Also, what it's like to be in jail and to be in prison. We employ and use folks in our trainings that are professionals in the industries that are covered, including mental health and substance use and people who work in jails and prisons. And we do a full 2-day training, like I said, quarterly. And then Rose's Room, which is going to be talked about by Dodie. Dodie's going to talk a little bit more about Rose's Room. I may help her out a little bit because it helps me too, having a son who's in prison, who's actually going to be getting out on April 3rd. Re-Entry Maine is our community engagement. This is how we tap into the network, or what we use the network for. We meet with folks who are inside of Maine's prisons and jails. We start at 9 months to a year, and we start introducing resources to those folks before they leave. And in the best case scenarios, by the time they get out, and all the meetings are done on Zoom, by the time they get out, we have a screen full of maybe 10 or 12 different individuals that are representing different resources, maybe family members, and a whole community is ready for those folks to get out. Additionally, we do county level work. So we have a Kennebec Peer Support Project where we provide peer support for local recovery court, treatment court, as well as the jail. Same in Androscoggin County, but we also have peer support for rehabs, and we have peer recovery support for 4 different treatment courts, drug treatment courts in the state of Maine. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to show some pictures of what we do. We travel around the state of Maine, and we have these meetings in person. One of those, the one in the upper left-hand corner is in the sheriff's office in Somerset County. The one on the right is in a faith-based organization called Columbia Street Project in Bangor. The one on the lower left is Bates College in Maine here, a pretty elite college. And then on the lower right is another kind of faith-based organization called Transformation Project that hosted and these are all monthly meetings that we have in different parts of the state. And we'll talk a little bit more about the statewide meetings that we have. Next slide, please. That's 2 of our folks that we supported that were getting out of prison, who are out of prison, and this is during the training. And that is the commissioner of the Department of Corrections of the state of Maine. His name is Randy Liberty, and Randy came and he was a guest speaker to start out our training, and these 2 guys were so excited to meet Randy and to be able to have a conversation with him about having been incarcerated. Next slide, please. So I put this slide up because this is what it's all about. For men and women that are getting out of prison, the number one thing that they talk about is family. And they talk about their children and their wives and their girlfriends and mothers and fathers. And these are the connections that they're looking to make. And we hope that this work will make that possible for them. Next slide. I think that may be it. Good, that's it. So sometimes folks do so many PowerPoint slides that we end up falling asleep, and I hope this doesn't put you to sleep. The thing that I want to talk about is, so we told you what we are and how this is who we are right now. But I think the interesting thing is how we got here. And we kind of did things the opposite way, right? A lot of times what happens is you have an idea of support that you'd like, or something a project that you would like to do, and then you build a network. Well, we did it the opposite. So back in June of 2017, I had been participating in a jail ministry, and I still am. At that point, I've been participating in the jail ministry for about 2 or 3 years. Catholic Charities here in Maine, Catholic Charities Social Ministries, decided to have a statewide social jail and prison ministry meeting, and invited everybody. And the place was packed, and the bishop came, and we prayed together, and then we had this wonderful meeting about how we could improve, what we were doing in supporting folks that are in prison and jail, and bringing the word to these folks, and then also what we could do in addition to that. So a gentleman and I from our particular jail ministry often raised our hands asking the question, what are we doing for folks after they leave jail and after they leave prison? We're filling them with hope, love. We're going in supporting them, once a week. What is it that we're doing for folks when they get out? And the answer was not much, or in most cases, nothing at all, which at that time really was almost exactly what was happening with the system itself. So folks were just leaving jail, and that was it. And we never heard from those folks again. But what we did see is we saw those same people coming back and coming back and coming back. They might come back next week. They might come back the next month. They might come back in a year or two. But it seemed that this revolving door, and it was discouraging. It was incredibly discouraging for us. These were men, and in this particular ministry, it's only men. It was 2 different groups of 25 men. So we were seeing around 50 people every week, and they were people that we fell in love with. These were folks that brought joy to each other and brought joy to us, and we considered them friends. So in this jail and prison ministry meeting, we kept raising our hand, I think to the point where we kind of were being a nuisance. And the person who was facilitating the meeting said, look, if you guys really want to do this thing, why don't you start a meeting and see what you can do to change things. And that's where this network started. And the first meeting that we had was in the upstairs on a super hot July. I know you don't think Maine is hot, but in the summertime, it gets really hot. And it was nearly 100 degrees that day, super high humidity up here. We're up in an upper room at Catholic Charities in Auburn, Maine, and 5 or 6 of us were having this conversation about what this would look like. And I had experience as a community organizer, so I said, well, I'm going to reach out to all the organizations that I know, and we'll invite them to come to a meeting. And so the next meeting was, we had 15 people that showed up, a couple of folks from Department of Corrections, and we thought, well, this is really neat. And we had this wonderful conversation over the next hour and a half to 2 hours, and said, hey, do you think we should do this again? So we said, yeah, we're going to come back the next month. The next month, we had nearly 40 people in the room. And then the next month, we had so many RSVPs that we had to go across the street to the basement of the church, where I don't even remember how many people were actually there. But what we realized was that I didn't know that reentry was something that a whole lot of people care about. And I didn't understand that reentry and folks being in jail, that most of the challenges that we face as a community intersect in our jails and prisons. And so it was literally almost every organization has some kind of piece of, it could possibly have some piece of someone's successful reentry and reintegration. So people were just showing up, and they were interested, and they were coming. So, and they were driving from many, many, many miles away. So people are driving an hour and a half to 2 hours to come to this meeting. So we decided, well, maybe we should just take this thing on the road. So we started taking it to the larger areas in the state of Maine. Some of these will mean nothing to you, but we went from Auburn, Maine, to Augusta, Maine, to Bangor, Maine, to the mid-coast of Maine, to the Western Mountains, to Portland. Eventually, we ended up actually going to Presque Isle. And if anybody really is interested, just look up Presque Isle. It's Presque, and then a separate word, Isles. It's in the very, very, very northern part of Maine. It takes me from here, just to give people a point of reference, from where I am right now, it's about a 2-hour drive to Boston. It's a 4.5 to 5 hour drive to Presque Isle. We went to Presque Isle and we thought, maybe 10 or 15 people are going to show up. 45, I think more than 45 people showed up to this meeting, including the sheriff, including, people from all over the county. And so there's this interest, right? So from that, we kind of started to say, what are we and what is this? And we're meeting in all of these different places monthly. And we're trying to decide, we finally came up with a name, the Maine Prisoner Re-Entry Network, because that's what we are, we're a network. We were supporting people when they were getting out. We weren't doing what I had described before of actually meeting with people when they were inside. But we tapped into what is it that and there were a lot of people joining us who had been in prison and jail. So we were asking the question, what is it that you need in your reentry? What is it that was a challenge for you? And that's how we kind of came up with this plan and this idea of meeting people inside of prison way before they get out of prison, so that we could start formulating this plan. And it's their plan, right? It's not our plan. It's not my plan. It's not the caseworker's plan. It's their plan. And the other major thing that we do in these meetings that we have with folks, and they're typically 2 of our folks with 1 person that we're supporting, is we say these words. And my staff gets sick of me saying this, but we say, dare to dream. And what that means is that a lot of these folks have been in survival mode their whole life. They've never been given the opportunity to actually think outside of survival. And when you ask them questions like, what kind of work have you done, or what kind of work do you want to do? Many of them will say, construction work or roofing or, something. And it's like, that's okay if that's what you want to do. But are there any things that when you were a kid or when you were growing up or as an adult, that you were really good at, or that you always dreamt that you could do that, and these folks come up with some amazing answers to that question. And I'll just use one example. A gentleman said to us, well, I've always been a really good writer, but I never thought I could actually make a living writing. So tapping into the network, we said, well, we have an organization that works with us that could pay for your tuition to go to the University of Southern Maine, which has a wonderful writing program. And so we introduced those folks, and we also have a great relationship with a magazine here in Maine called Journey Magazine. It's a recovery from substance use disorder magazine. And you could submit one of your articles to them, and he did, and a couple of his articles actually got published. He's currently engaged in the writing and journalism program at the University of Southern Maine, and it was all paid for. But these were connections that could not have been made if we weren't having these conversations and we weren't listening to the person. The other thing I want to get into, and I don't want to take too much time, because I do definitely want to talk about Rose's Room and how important that's been. But the thing of resource guides. And in Maine, I don't know how this is everywhere else, but in Maine, everybody likes to say, oh, we got a resource guide. we got this, you know, county-wide resource guide. We got this city area resource guide. It's got all the AA meetings and the NA meetings, and it's got the treatment centers and the mental health, you know, all the resources, workforce. And I don't know if anybody else has seen this, but this is what we see with resource guides, is that almost by the time they get printed, they're already outdated. And the resource that is right there in front of you it's no longer in existence. The other piece about resource guides is, even if they're perfect as far as phone numbers and contact people and schedules and, you know, when they're open and things like that, is that for old guys like me, I remember the yellow pages. And I remember looking for a doctor or an attorney or a mechanic or whatever. And you open up the yellow pages and it's just these lists of you know, whatever you were looking for, let's say a dentist. And you don't know whether you're picking a good dentist. You don't know. You have no idea. It's just like, it's a crapshoot. So that's where we come in. Okay. That's where we as a community come in. This is the community's responsibility to support people that are getting out. And so for the network, when someone's saying, I'm looking for this particular resource, let's just say a recovery residence, and they say, yeah, I saw this one, or I saw this one, or I saw this one. We're the living, breathing human resource guide to help that person find the appropriate resource, and also the one that we feel is the most appropriate for them, but also we have a track record of success. And if we don't know about that particular resource, we do know within the network who we can reach out to that can fill us in on whether that's a good place to be sending or recommending for that person to go to. One of the last things that I'm going to say about the Maine Prisoner Re-Entry Network is centered around COVID. And for a lot of folks, for most of us, COVID was a really rough time. And for the Maine Prisoner Re-Entry Network, it was actually the time, it was a time that helped us to grow exponentially. And the reason for that is that once COVID hit, all of these meetings that we were having all around the state were done. No more meetings around the state, of which we had at least 10 monthly meetings going at one time. And the other thing is that we had to propose to the Department of Corrections a way that we could meet with people inside of the prison. So we proposed, can we do Zoom meetings with people inside? Now, before that, we were meeting with people in person. And we were only able to introduce a resource here or there. It was difficult getting clearance for people to come in, whether it was workforce or faith-based organizations or anybody. It was just really difficult. And for anybody that works in prisons, they know that there could be a shutdown in the prison because there was some kind of violent thing that happened inside. There could be other issues. So we proposed Zoom. And they said, sure, let's do that. And so we ended up having Zoom meetings with people. And like I had said earlier, that's how we do this. And that's how we introduce the resources to folks. The other thing that happened because of COVID and because of Zoom was that folks were starving for this networking, this contact with each other. And we had a staff meeting that was going on every Tuesday at 9:30 in the morning. And some of our community partners are like, well, what do you mean? How come you can't come to this meeting? I'm like, well, we have a staff meeting at 9:30 to 11 every Tuesday. They're like, oh, can we come? And we're like, yeah, sure, whatever. Next thing you know, we've got 15, 20, 25, 30, 40 people coming to this, what was a staff meeting. And it turned into what we now call, and now it's as old as COVID. It started in April of 2020. It's called the weekly statewide convening. And it's literally every kind of organization that you can imagine They're at the low end, it's 50 people. It's usually more like 60, 70, 80 people, depending on what the particular topic is for the week. We give everybody a chance to introduce themselves. There's massive amount of networking that's happening in private chat during the meeting. We highlight certain organizations that can be beneficial to everybody that's in the room. It is truly statewide, so that Presque Isle way up in northern Maine, people up there in Aroostook County is the name of the county, and then folks all the way down in southern Maine in York County, understanding that folks that live in York County are less than an hour away from Boston, so they're kind of in more of an urban area. Every county in between, we get to kind of talk to each other and network and work with each other. And the coolest part, the one that I tell everybody, let's not take this for granted, is that we have people joining us from multiple prisons. So we have people joining us from the Southern Maine Women's Re-Entry Center. We have people joining us from Maine State Prison, which is our maximum security prison here in Maine. We have people joining us from Mountain View Correctional Center, which is in kind of the far-flung northern parts of Maine, and from Maine Correctional Center. So we have, and they're the ones who are guiding us, right? We're making sure to involve people who are in reentry, who are entering reentry, who have re-entered into the community. Our entire staff. I was telling some folks a little bit before the meeting. I am the only person on our staff that has not been incarcerated. Every single other person on our staff has either been in jail or prison or both. And that's what guides us to do what's right. There's nothing, at least in my eyes, worse than a bunch of people that really have good intentions, but don't have that lived experience, telling people with lived experience what's good for them. It's so wonderful to have people in the room that correct me often with things that I'm feeling or things that I'm saying. And they also have a radar for truth and for untruth that most of the rest of us don't. So it's just an incredible experience to admire these folks who have been in jail and been in prison, who have turned their lives around. And I'll before I go, one more thing is we need to be thinking about, and because we're really involved in the recovery community here in Maine, we need to be thinking about recovery from incarceration. So there's recovery from substance use disorder, and I'm a person in long-term recovery myself, and I'm a person also who lives with mental health challenges. So I understand what recovery is, but I don't understand what recovery from incarceration is because I didn't spend a single day with it. If somebody's been in jail or prison for any period of time, it requires an ongoing focus on that person's recovery from incarceration. I have the chair of our board spent 63 days in jail. Now, compared to most of the people that we support, that's not a lot. But here's a gentleman who is a college graduate, one of the most intelligent men that I've ever known. When he got out of jail, he was, for lack of a better word, a mess. And it took him a good 60 to 90 days before his name is Sean, before he was Sean again. It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. So thank you all for allowing me to talk a little bit about the Maine Prisoner Re-Entry Network. And I'll just quickly say that the reason why Rose's Room exists is because of this network.
Thank you, Bruce. I know we'll be coming back to some of what you've shared with us here in just a little bit, but now we would like to turn to Reverend Dr. Dodie Sheffield. Dr. Sheffield is a retired United Methodist pastor living in Wells, Maine, so in Maine as well. She served in local small church ministry for 24 years. And under her leadership, her churches in Southern Maine helped fund the establishment of the Transformation Project, a center providing reentry support for Mainers after incarceration. She currently has a nephew who's incarcerated and a brother who is being released after 27 years of incarceration. Dodie has been participating in Rose's Room since September of 2018, when an in-person group started meeting in Westbrook. So welcome, Dr. Sheffield. We're looking forward to hearing a little bit more about the ministry that you've been involved in. So,
thank you. Just a little update. My brother actually has been released from incarceration and has been living in Lowell in a homeless shelter for 2 weeks, and is very appreciative of all of the support that he's gotten. There are a lot of ways that people can be supported, and he has certainly had the experience that Bruce talked about needing to be in recovery from incarceration. 27 years is a long time to be told when to go to bed and when to get up and when to eat, and it's an enormous change. I got involved with Rose's Room in part because of the relationship that two of my churches had with the creation of the Transformation Project. We were introduced to it in its early pre-stages when my church in Portland decided to sell their church building. And one of the people who was considering buying it was the Transformation Project. And they didn't end up buying our building, but we made a relationship with them in the conversations about it that made us know that we wanted to be a part of their ministry. And so that church gave a lot of financial and I think also emotional support to the Transformation Project as it was being set up. And at that time, I wanted to have some kind of close relationship, personal relationship with Transformation Project. And I heard about Rose's Room. And as it happened, as you mentioned, I have two family members who at the time were both incarcerated. And I thought this is the perfect place for me to show up at the Transformation Project, is in there getting a group started for Rose's Room. What Rose's Room does is it recognizes that when someone is sent to prison, the whole family is sent to prison. It is something that doesn't just affect the incarcerated, but also everyone connected with them. One of the biggest pieces of this, and the thing that Rose's Room is so helpful for, is that for people who have a family member who's incarcerated, there can be an enormous sense of stigma. In this country, especially, we stigmatize everyone who goes into prison. We identify them as criminal. They now, once someone has been incarcerated, they are identified as a criminal. We like to label, and we label people who are incarcerated. And for family members of the incarcerated, this stigma feels like it's something that also reflects on them. And so it's very difficult for people who suddenly have a family member who's incarcerated to talk to anyone about it, because they feel a sense of shame. They feel that in some way they are responsible for this person being incarcerated, regardless of what of what the particular violation is that's involved in the person being incarcerated. In my case, my brother was incarcerated as a sex offender, which is particularly deep stigmatizing attached to it. I remember at the time that he was arrested back in 1996, my mother, who was, I think at the time in her early 80s, actually considered having her name changed because she was so afraid of being associated with my brother because the case was in the papers. Rose's Room didn't exist while my mother was alive, but it would have meant the world to her. She could not share with friends. She didn't feel comfortable sharing with church members. She didn't want anyone to know. And that made it very difficult for her. The only person she had to support her was me. And because she felt so strongly about this, I was very limited in feeling in being able to share with other people. So I really understand how this encloses people. And even though I didn't feel that it should be kept a secret, I tried to respect how she was feeling. So when I heard about Rose's Room, I appreciated what a difference it can make in people's lives. When you have lost a family member to incarceration, you are suffering from the separation from them. You are suffering from the separation from other family members who disapprove, who don't want to be associated. And you are suffering separation often. We were talking a little bit before we came on the call about faith communities and how in many cases people don't want people in their churches to know that they have someone who's incarcerated in their family. What Rose's Room does is gives people a place where they can go and talk to other people who are in their situation. And anybody who's in recovery, excuse me just a moment. Anyone who's been in the recovery community understands how important it is to walk into a room full of people who share the same life problems that you do. And that's what Rose's Room does for family members of people who are incarcerated. And what I've seen in Rose's Room over the years is people transformed from feeling hopeless, from feeling ashamed, from feeling alone, to people who are not only comfortable talking with the people in the room about having a family member who's incarcerated, but who are more open to talking to other people about it, who are free from a sense that they have to be secret keepers, are freed from the sense that there needs to be shame about this. And it's a place where we can educate people about the need to remove this stigmatization. In a country where mass incarceration is running rampant, where the numbers of people who are incarcerated is absolutely insane, it's so important to be able to change people's minds and change their understandings of the incarcerated. And Rose's Room really does that. I have seen people come in who can't stop crying and turn into people who find Rose's Room a place to laugh together and a place to share love and support. And I've seen people who are committed to staying with Rose's Room even after their loved ones are released, because they want to offer that to other people. And I would say the only thing negative that I can think of to say about Rose's Room is it's too much of a well-kept secret. And we just wish that a lot more people knew about it, because we want to see this help offered to other people. I guess I could go on and on forever talking about Rose's Room, but I'd like to open it up to questions, and I'd like to hear if Bruce would like to add something to this.
So Dodie and I never knew each other before Rose's Room, but Dodie is now part of my family because of Rose's Room. We're all of us feel like family.
Mm-hmm.
And there are things that we've told people in that room, told each other in that room, that we haven't told anyone else. And I want to, if I could, I'd like to recognize Rose, who we named the meeting after. Rose saw my picture in the paper because it was like this volunteering after 50 article. It was, just some article in the paper, and she contacted a family member and said, "Do you know this guy?" And she happened to be a neighbor. And she said, yeah. And so she called me at work and she said, "Why isn't there a support group for family and loved ones of folks who are incarcerated?" And I said, "Oh, there must be." So I called everybody I knew in the state of Maine, in the network or whatever, and nobody had heard of it. Nobody had heard of anything like it. And many of them said, "Oh, I'd like to go to that meeting if there was one in existence." So I called Rose back and I said, "You're 100% right." And she said, "Well, can you help me get a meeting going?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll see you." Within 4 days, we had contacted St. Michael's Church. It's in our town. And they said, "Sure, you can come in on, what was the night? I can't remember the night. I think it's a Wednesday. 7 o'clock to 8:30. Sure, here you go. And I called Rose up and I said, "You got a meeting. Here we go." And here's the other thing. Rose's Room was a tragic victim of COVID. We had 11 chapters in the state of Maine. Now we're down to 1 chapter and 1 virtual meeting. So, and it's a matter of getting it started again. And it was on this upward trajectory of getting support for a whole lot of people, but COVID really crushed Rose's Room. So, but for me personally, it's a family. We're a family. And Rose went from a person who wouldn't tell she would tell, matter of fact, her son was incarcerated in Texas. And people would ask her, family members, friends, "So where's your son?" "Oh, he's going to school in Texas." Well, he was taking some classes in prison, I guess. So she wasn't really lying. To a person who, she's in line in the grocery store and she hears anything remotely about prison or jail, she'll turn around and talk to the person about Rose's Room. And when her husband was talking about that transformation, tears were running. This is a man who's not very emotional. Tears were running down his face because he was so happy about this transformation of his wife as it relates to her son, who's going to be in prison. Sorry, I always say one last thing. One thing I want to make sure that everybody understands is when you have a family or member or loved one in prison or jail, you do what's called prison math. And if you're in your 60s and your son is going to be getting out or daughter is going to be getting out in 20 years, you're doing the math. You're like, am I going to be alive at 83? Am I going to be alive when my son or daughter are released from prison? Those are the kind of things that we talk about in Rose's Room. Thanks, Dodie. That was awesome.
Thanks. Thank you, Bruce. Yeah, and thank you, Dodie. So you said a few things that, Dodie, that I'd like to kind of come back to. I live in community with men that have left Florida's prisons. We live in community together, have a house together. I myself am not formally incarcerated, but they are, and we get to see, and myself and a few volunteers, a few community members that join me and kind of accompanying these men through the process of reintegration. And inevitably, you come to those moments where men are having to confront their shame, as you talked about, that kind of that deep-seated shame, the internalization of the feelings of rejection, of ostracization, of family grievances, and all of that. And these men oftentimes will tell me, that they don't feel comfortable out in public, or having people, sometimes just even taking pictures of them. And this, we've had conversations. I've had conversations with these guys, and we talked about this, that the truth of the matter is that there's the human condition is challenged with shame and is challenged with secrets. And we know this from the beginnings of our tradition, right? In Genesis and throughout, the dealings with shame. And I oftentimes tell these men, I say, first of all, I don't think what they have to go through is in any way preferred, but, they oftentimes, with their capacity to resilience and to being able to try again at relationships, to renew relationships, to me is a model for most of us, that frankly, a lot of us have the luxury of the worst things that we've done being things that are kept secret. And because of the unfortunate kind of public nature of these crimes and the way that they're reported, these men don't have that luxury. But really, in the end, is it a luxury that we have to hold these things in secret, and to not have those opportunities of mercy and of reconciliation? And so it sounds like what's going on in Rose's room is something that is not only for people that are incarcerated, or but it's for people, it's for all of us, really. I mean, it sounds like something about what it means to create a culture of mercy, and anyways, that when you were talking,
Absolutely. I think I've on a number of occasions, when I was still working, I'm retired now, but I have preached on the myth of redemptive violence. And I think our country is steeped in it. Our media is full of it. And the myth of redemptive violence says that if we can just identify who the bad guys are and either kill them or lock them up, then the world will be a better place. And because of this myth of redemptive violence and this wish to be able to identify who the bad people are, we create this stigma that we place on people who are incarcerated, because we want to identify them as the bad guys, and we demonize them. And particularly, my brother is a case, anyone involved in any kind of sexual misconduct or violation, those people are doubly demonized and stigmatized. And we prefer to think that they are monsters, that they are not like other people. But one of the gifts of walking through this journey with my brother is that I came to recognize that they are people with many layers, and there are serious problems. They have to acknowledge, and he has learned over time to recognize what was really happening in his life, that he was narrating in a different way. Often the story from somebody's own point of view isn't isn't criminal at all. They have a story that they tell that makes it all right. And he has learned over time not to try to tell that story anymore. And he has acknowledged what he was really doing. But he has also kept an amazing attitude through all of this. And what he wants now is to be out in the world, to give back to other people who are in similar situations to his, to give something back. And he's a whole human being. And all of these people are whole human beings, complex, and they have, many of them, done things that they should not have done. But it doesn't change who they are. It doesn't change the fact that they are people, that they are children of God, that they are complicated. We're all complicated. And as you say, we all have things that we don't want other people to know about. Some of us can keep that luxury, but is it really a luxury? Again, in recovery, what we find out is that the real gift is to be able to speak our story, the whole story as it really is, and learn to love and accept ourselves as we are.
Mm.
And that is all about a ministry of mercy.
Amen. And that's really what I think, individuals such as your brother and others can at times show us, and I think having those spaces like Rose's Room and other venues to be able to share that would be something that, that many of us need to hear, and to be able to engage in those conversations. Just wanted to go to the chat here. There's a few questions that have come up. The first question is, let's see. Yes, is there a format for Rose's Room meeting? What is it based on? Is it 12-step? Is it hospice care for the grief? What is the format for these meetings?
Yeah. So we had when we first started the format, we had a person who ran hospice meetings for folks, and I had many years in Alcoholics Anonymous, and we kind of mashed up those two things. and I will tell you, early on we would read the whole, we have a whole format that we're more than pleased to share with everybody. This isn't like a franchise that we want to make any money off of. We would love to see a Rose's Room anywhere and everywhere. And we'd be glad to share the format and kind of the history and the logo, whatever you want. But anyway, we combine those things, because the thing is that when one of our family members goes to prison, it's like a death. It really is. But it's weird because you don't really get to mourn it completely, because they're going to be coming back. It's just a really kind of a weird thing. So we base it on AA. It's not 12 steps, but it maintains some of the anonymity of what happens, what happens in Rose's Room stays in Rose's Room, those kinds of things. And that we respect people of all religions or no religion at all, just kind of, just being as welcoming as possible, but keeping in mind that there are people there that need to be given a space to mourn.
We've got probably time just for one more brief question here, and I'll try to condense this just a little bit. There's a gentleman, Robert, in Wisconsin, who's looking at creating something for those that also have been charged with sex offenses, establishing support for those, but has seen a lot of resistance both in their community and also resistance, especially it sounds like from the Catholic community, in trying to publicize these efforts. Any ideas of how to work past those limits would be greatly appreciated. How have you all worked past that? And either of you can take that question.
I don't know, Dodie, I don't know if you have anything on that.
I don't so much have anything that we've done externally. I think within Rose's Room, what we found is that simply sharing our experiences has changed our attitudes. But I do know that my brother has received a lot of support from the community of men who have been, just to explain a little, just briefly, my brother's situation was that he received a sentence for a maximum of 12 years when he was originally sentenced in 1996, but because of Massachusetts law, he was made what's sometimes referred to as a civil detainee, which means basically that he remained incarcerated until such time as he could prove himself no longer sexually dangerous. So in other words, even though he served his full sentence, they continue to hold him. And I don't know what the situation is in Wisconsin, but in Massachusetts, they are able to do this. And you have to prove that you are not, either to a team of examiners, or or barring that, you have to take it to court and convince a jury of 12 people. And I've been there several times with my brother. It's almost impossible to get a jury of 12 independent people to agree to release a registered sex offender. So the attitudes are.
I know
it's hard. We do, just so we're right at time. I apologize, but this is obviously a conversation that I think we could have again very soon. Again, I mean, it's obvious that this is a model for other states, and especially what I heard about Rose's Room. I think that I'd love to hear more about that as well. Thank you again, Bruce and Dodie, for your presentations, for sharing with us a little bit of the extraordinary work that you all are doing in Maine. All right. God's peace.